So my name's Andrew Turner, for anyone here I haven't met before. So I'm excited. This is pretty amazing to be here for the first.
Do you want the lights off?
No. I think so. No signs. So I'm going to talk a bit about collaborating on geospatial data. It's something I spend a lot of my time thinking about and doing. Obviously, we're here kind of all bought into the idea of open data, open mapping data, geospatial data, openness, collaboration in general. But I really want to talk about some of the meat behind how valuable it is to actually collaborate around the data and actually understand what it is that users want to do, and how they're actually going to engage with these things. I mean, we're here kind of talking very meta, the map about the map, but starting to think about what are they going to be doing with that. We're this kind of people. We love diving through the data itself. It's our value, it's our goal, it's the thing we want to be playing with and gathering more of, right? It's always hoarding and getting it together in a different way that we want to share it, but it still is getting together as much as we kind of can. That's what gets us excited. Obviously, and us being here is kind of self-identifying, but we also, half of us probably, half of each of us is out there doing something else with it. We're mapping different trails and communities, things like that. But it's also understanding what's the kind of long tail. As Steve talked about earlier, is that understanding what that long tail is. What are the other people that came and signed up once, but kind of left, and why didn't they stay around, and what can we do to get those? And then also talking about taking that to the edge, taking the people who probably have never been to OpenStreetmap.org, might not even have an internet connection, but still allowing them to actually participate and collaborate in some of the things we've actually done around that. So with all this excitement around data, actually I was just talking to a friend from grad school the other day and talked about OpenStreetmap. And he said, "Oh, that's cool." And he started thinking about it. Obviously, he's an engineer. Usually studies fish, but this was kind of his interesting thing. Like, well, how can I apply my engineering to this? Started thinking, well, why aren't we taking all this great data that's automatically generated and also imaging? Why aren't we just auto tracing it? Why aren't we throwing algorithms at it to do automatic street line extractions? And why do we actually have to run around and gather this data? It seems like we just generate it. Right? And so from day one, it was kind of realized that one, it's questionable you get good data that way, but it's also how does that keep growing? What happens after 2 or 3 scientists sat down and wrote those algorithms and pulled in all the data? What happens the day after? I mean, this is actually Washington, D.C., and what's here is actually as important, but seeing that a lot of this is import from either Taiga or from the D.C. GIS data. It's been touched up a lot. But what you're missing is this kind of nice little kidney shape, which in this case is from the zoo in D.C., the Smithsonian National Zoo. And this is the kind of value of building a community and understanding that in certain ways that there's a couple of us that cared a lot about the zoo and want to spend our time going mapping the zoo. We want to find our way to the penguin, but it's this kind of thing, and understanding what is it to someone who lives at the zoo or works at the zoo. Should have GPS too. But people that care about that niche little thing, and that's the thing they're going to map. And they might not come to OpenStreetmap.org specifically, but they still might understand the value of having that kind of centralized and shared back out, but attracting to that individual attention in the end. Everyone's kind of probably very, very familiar with Ito World, year of edits 2008. And one thing that's kind of always struck me, and it's interesting, I usually have to explain whenever I show the video, is when you're first kind of zooming out of London, you hop over Europe, and you look around, you see all these kind of little lightning flashes. When Kate showed the Haiti one, you see the same thing, you see these lightning flashes of these individual ways and areas and stuff being done. And all of a sudden, the US pops up, and you just like, boom, state, state, state. And having to explain, oh, those are the Tiger imports, right? And here's the first kind of case of, well, we kind of went and said, well, we'll just take all the data and we can just do that one pass. And there's always this kind of question, was that a great idea and well worth it, or was that kind of a little bit detracted against the community building in the United States? And us having to go and filling in a blank map and understanding what that is, we kind of cheated and got a little bit ahead, and now it's taken us a couple of years to finally try and be building up this local community. So, so how do we do that? How do we actually now go back and actually understand how to build those local communities? So everyone's probably uses, the Wikis have been a really good place in wiki.openstreetmap. So I just pulled up DC in particular. But here's where a lot of us that are comfortable in wiki kind of spaces can go and start sharing, like, well, here's the data sets I have found, and here's more plan on running a mapping party. Here's the tips and tricks for how to do these things to clean up the hydrology or the park information, or we ran into ones with parking lots, all some P's showing up everywhere. And so we converse in the data community, the OpenStreetmap community, in a wiki, and we feel comfortable editing the wiki, which is not only kind of like us all editing a Word document, just with more webby, but we're comfortable doing that, and so that's how we interact. I actually personally don't, but a lot of people subscribe mailing lists, and I get admonished for it a lot, but it's so high volume. So on the left is the first only 2/3 of the mailing lists that are available to somebody coming into OpenStreetmap. And then here is just the last couple days on Talk US alone, which is still kind of nascent and growing, but so people are doing mailing lists, so they're already in my inbox, I usually don't check it that often, depending on which one. I already have 5,000 unread messages, and so email isn't always the best place to collaborate. Even then, the conversation that goes on here, again, is about the data itself. It's things like directional prefix, postfix proposal. It has some local ones, talking about clean Salt Lake City names, but a lot of them are very meta. Again, they're about the tool itself, they're about the data format and the tags, and not so much a lot about what people care about and how they want to use the information or where it's going. So change sets we've talked a lot about, and so I kind of was going and playing with them even more recently. So this is what happens when I zoom into DC and I say get me history, it shows me the history change set. And as we've talked about in the past day or so, is that in here there's a couple live edits by people, but a lot of these Gomer and Zybot, XYBot, a lot of these are all automated ones. They made an edit both in Chile, and they made an edit in St. Petersburg or Moscow, and all of a sudden that included the bounding box of DC, so all of a sudden the DC edit shows up in the DC bounding box. So one, getting through here to the local, like if I want to ask the question, who's working in my area, what are they doing, and how can we actually work together, right? It's a little difficult to get through this, and also the GRSS is malformed, XY switched. But anyway, but it still can actually go and easily find out and start conversations around this, which is a little unfortunate. So you can dive in, there's user diaries, which are pretty good, but I can't actually zoom in and make it in my neighborhood, so half of them are German, or they're in Spanish, or in English in different areas of the world. Again, they're not necessarily, they may or may not be tying into my specific interests about this. So if I'm someone that just wants to go and map hiking trails or something like that, it's not something I can really easily do, but there are some of these tools here, again, about usually OpenStreetmap specific. So, but we have seen kind of little communities emerge out of these specific communities of interest, so Open Peace Map and Kayaking Map. That's Harry Wood, showing how he has some great kayak maps now in OpenStreetmap, and Open Cycle Maps everyone knows about, and Open Mountain Bike Trail. So there's a lot of these now, OpenStreetmap being repurposed as part of what the value has been demonstrated to the broader public, is that the maps can be repurposed. They don't have to be auto-centric and owned by one company, that anybody can go and repurpose this in a way that's meaningful for them, which is obviously really, really compelling and part of the point. And so this is the first kind of foray about putting it out there so it can go into a mountain biking website, and mountain bikers can talk about things. The map is a really valuable piece, but it's not about the map. The map is just a way for them to interact with the thing they're passionate about. When I talked about with someone yesterday, I just want to show it here because it's another kind of specific community of interest. This is the University of Maryland. It used to be called TerpNav. They're the Terrapins. And now it's called the UMCP pedestrian map. But it's pretty cool. So they've gone and mapped the entire campus with routing and directionality. So you can actually say, I need to go from the stadium and I need to wander my way back to my dorm. And how do I get that way? And it shows you the pathways. But what's interesting, so one is very specific to Maryland, how you get around the University of Maryland. But also there's these great little filters, so you can go choose things like no stairs, sloped curbs only, and no steep inclines, and turn that on. All of a sudden, it gives me the route I can maybe take in a wheelchair, or if I'm having difficulty dealing with steps. So it gives me this very other specific thing. And it's a lot of really deep technology. Talked about earlier about routing engines and directionality data. But in the end of the person is that they just want to get from one place to another in a way they can access it. And again, OpenStreetmap can start providing those tools out. And you can start maybe conversing and saying, well, for me this didn't work here. They're not necessarily thinking about reporting to OpenStreetmap. They're reporting to what they think is University of Maryland, but maybe that ends up in OpenStreetmap, but conversing about the area of interest they care about. So essentially what we have is this kind of community passion, these individuals, and it's trying to understand what drives them, what motivates them to spend their spare time or their day job or whatever it is doing these things and engaging in this way. Why do they say, it'd be great, we should go to Disney World for vacation, but instead, Tennessee just isn't mapped enough, and we're going to spend our vacation going and mapping. But think of it because they're doing something else. They're going hiking for a weekend, they're going biking, or they're doing something else. And along the way, they might contribute, either use the data, or they might contribute back to it. So it's kind of beginning to tap that long tail by understanding what motivates them, and why should they actually participate more and more. So I want to kind of dig a little bit into some of the models of crowdsourcing and how people, we talk about gathering and working on data, the different models that people usually kind of latch onto. So this is the kind of traditional, VGI is the term, so volunteer geographic information. I asked you a question, you gave me data. And this is what, when I think it's changing a little bit now with some of the more enlightened agencies and organizations, but that they just say, there's people out there, and they're going to give us their data, and it's going to be great, and they're just going to take care of it for us. So that doesn't really work, because again, what are the incentives for these people down here? What's the value they're getting back? I mean, maybe it shows up on some website, maybe they just said thank you and they did something, but I'm not actually using the data, not listening to me or giving me maybe the data back at all. The other model has kind of become quite popular, is this open government. It's some government publishing on a website, saying, here's some data, and then eventually some volunteer will come and take that data and do something cool with it. And it's kind of the first step of the value chain that provided that value back, but the government's not taking any feedback here. So they say, okay, well, we're going to put the data out. And so this is the kind of crowd curation. I'm going to put data out there, I'm going to have the crowd take care of it. But what we've talked a lot about here is well, what happens with that data? Now it's kind of, is it forked? How does it just keep on getting pushed one way, and you're fixing it, and so there's the open data, and then there's the data in this organization. And so we've started talking about closing the loop, and this is a great step, but it doesn't quite go far enough about accepting this data back. And so understanding is that what we really, really need to get to is this model of organizations, they're going to open the data. That's the things we in this community will spend our time doing is helping them push that data out. Because they're gathering internally, push it out, make it available to the public. We will go and help either that ourselves, but then understanding what are the communities of interest that are actually going to start collaborating and sharing edits back and comments back, and then sharing that back to the governments and back down to the organizations. It's starting to create these feedback loops. So as they go down to the organization, they come back out. But the way we're going to achieve this is by understanding what drives the value of people providing that data and then actually bringing it back. And then again, they're not necessarily thinking about OpenStreetmap first and foremost. They're thinking about what is it that I care about, and what do I need to do. So there's this great these principles of data sharing by Todd Huffman. Todd Huffman, if no one knows, he's background's kind of quite varied, but now he essentially is a nation builder. He deploys to Afghanistan a lot and to relief exercises to help kind of very good social networking in order to open and share data and get collaboration going. So he kind of summed it up into these 3 ones about data sharing. So the first thing you want to do whenever you share data is you want to create immediate value for the person contributing the data. So this kind of encourages and gets that first aspect of getting data out of the system and start people kind of rewarded for sharing it back out. So and then you're going to be using the system and any improvements you make you're going to be giving back to them. And then the third and last one is that that you share those derivative works back with the community. So again, you kind of, the term pay it forward is you make these edits, you pay it forward, and then thinking about within what communities they're going to be doing this, because not everyone's focusing on the data itself, but focusing on what they want to do with that data. So so talk a little bit about obviously what I kind of do for my day job is, we kind of do this stuff, and it's valuable in understanding. Yesterday, the high schools talked about the value of start merging into multiple data sets to understand what that value is, because again, it's not necessarily about gathering the OpenStreetmap data, but it's understanding that how are red lights affecting local businesses. So one of the things we do with something called Geo Commons is help pull this data together and start publishing it back out in various different ways to have people want to interact with that data. Something we've also been experimenting a lot with is so we can pull in like shape files and CSVs and things like that, and we've been experimenting with dumping that out as OpenStreetmap files. So again, very, very lightweight, easy data conversion for people who aren't going to go run a Java or a Python script, but making first the kind of putting in front of them, what do you want to do, and make it super easy with a couple clicks. But then really what it's about in the end is giving them tools where they can use OpenStreetmap data and other public open data to answer questions they specifically have about their area of interest. So one kind of project like this was in Ann Arbor. It was actually Ann Arbor, Michigan. Huge drive around opening up a lot of the transit data themselves, so because there's a Google office there, and so they're a little wary of kind of Google taking the transit data and then putting it in their system, but the city not negotiating to share it out, so they started really pushing on the open data. And what they want to do is start analyzing the open transit data with the OpenStreetmap, with the road network, and are there underserved communities that have not enough buses. So this is actually showing themed up by number of stops per day. So obviously you can see there's the downtown area, and the top left is the core downtown area. Bottom right is a little town called Ypsilanti, and then out to the airport. But so here they want to see, and they want to use all this open data to answer their interests. Is there communities that are being underserved, or where should I buy a house? Where should I avoid traffic, or if I want to carpool, I want to stop somewhere and park to be able to take the bus into the city. These are the kinds of questions they have. It wasn't in the end to the average citizen about I need open data and trace more systems. It's I need to find out where to live or how to get there. I want to help a community of interest that I care about, an underprivileged community, and helping then go and take this back to the government, influence them to open more bus routes or run buses more frequently. Kind of another example of this is Kate actually went and made one. This was kind of an analysis a little bit around OSM and the DC import, but it was also about like bike trails, about pulling in, well, here are the OSM bike trails and here are the DC bike trails. Because you can start seeing things when you start layering them together, like, well, can I route between different areas of the city? If should I go back to the city and say, well, we need to have more bike trails through certain other areas of the city, and so I can pull together these various disparate pieces of information to be able to kind of provide that common picture. So it's understanding these communities and engagement, and so understanding that how do you get as close out to the edges where the people are working already and what they care about. Again, so they live in an urban area and they want to go online and ask these questions and play with this open data, or are these, in this case, this is actually in the Sudan, and they're actually talking about their villages and how to plan out building their own villages. And these people who have never really seen actually aerial images or overhead views of their villages at all, but yet they start collaborating, want to ask questions about the data and the map, start marking on it. And there's a couple really interesting use cases that have kind of emerged the last couple of years, and people here have either been involved or probably heard about them, but they're definitely very interesting to look at about, again, what's driving the data. The data isn't for data's sake, it's for actual use and purpose. So this is in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip. And so what happened was there was they shut the border down, and there was no one could get in and out of there, and they were shelling. And so, but there were no data for any relief organizations. So the drive was we need our own data for our own security, and it was all about security and getting data. And so a lot of people volunteered to OpenStreetmap around the world, as well as then locally organizations about mapping the data so they could have their own sense of security in the area. And it took them only 3 weeks to do that. So that's an amazing amount of incentive to actually saying for our security we need to map this, and that's the value behind it, so we're not controlled by another government. There's another fascinating use case. This is Skylar Earle worked on this a couple years ago, and this is a 1 acre plot of land where over 500 people live, and that's Walla Chal at Mumbai. And so what was happening in the area was you could get a grant to rebuild your neighborhood if you come with a little urban plan. There were these contractors and consultants coming in saying, we'll do it for you. They ask them a bunch of questions and survey them. The contractor would get the money, and then they just build a high-rise there, and also start charging the local tenants. And the tenants actually had no real say in the end. But also because when you start training them on open source tools and open data, what they could do is actually start planning out their own area and actually putting in their own bids for grants to actually rebuild their own area. So again, this kind of drive in their community of interest was actually, let's rebuild our neighborhood. And the maps and the data are just tools by which I can get to that rebuilding my own little neighborhood. Map Kavera is another kind of popular one. This is Mikhail Marin's actually wanted to help map. This is one of the largest slum in sub-Saharan Africa, and outside Nairobi. And if you look at any official government maps, it's actually marked as a forest. And so the government wants to move people out. It's like, well, there's no one who really lives there anyway, so we'll just bulldoze it out. So you think, okay, let's go teach him to map. But what it's taken over a year of him actually living there and understanding the local culture and the local people and saying what drives you, what do you actually care about, and understanding what in the end will actually get them to map and then maintain the maps over time, and then create discussions around health and education, living, building businesses, and that's why they're actually going to start engage and use the maps. There's the another incentivization and community of interest is Kate's talked about the Haiti earthquake, but it's interesting to see how the community itself actually communicated and worked together on helping respond to an amazing response around the Haiti earthquake. So within an afternoon of January 12th, where pretty much the only data that existed had been imported from the Haitian GIS department 1 year before for the major roads. Tim Waters had done it, said over his Christmas vacation. I worked them a little bit, but there's really no incentive on the ground. No one was engaging with the data. No one externally. There was no commercial interest. So the data wasn't sufficient in and of itself. It needed a community to actually maintain it. So what's probably well known is that this essentially was the Haitian GIS department after the earthquake, because there was no internal capability to generate the data. So what happened is people all around the world started gathering together that weekend to start mapping. And so you start all of a sudden dropping a whole bunch of people that were incentivized. This base incentivization was this desire to help. That more than sending $5, I want to donate my time and effort and energy into mapping. And so how do they start coordinating and collaborating? Because these were people that were spending, not only getting trained on OpenStreetmap, but they were within 2 hours, 2 days trying to be collaborative all around the world across different time zones. So how do you start communicating very quickly around these things and start sharing tips and knowledge and capabilities and who's marking what areas so we're not overlapping on top of it? None of which really worked really well, but there are a lot of kind of lessons learned out of it. So things like, first, just reaching out to these communities saying, what's the lightest way you can actually start mapping? So YouTube videos. Kate actually went and made, I think, 2 3-minute videos that were just like how to start mapping roads in Haiti, very specific and very quick to start learning how to do these things. So understanding, someone said, within a couple minutes, I want to be helpful, show me how to be helpful, and I can dive in. Obviously people started using the Wiki, and so people would learn, again, these were mostly technologists, but they were communicating around where do I find data sources, how do I begin mapping? I'm not necessarily engaged in the project forever, but I just want to know how to start contributing now. And you saw that other people had set up other wikis where they're also collaborating. So you have potentially multiple parallel wikis setting up, which is some issue to kind of address in the future, about how to start collating all these things together. So, but what the effect was that people started focusing also on what the area of interest was for them. So they knew the affected area, which was this pink and blue area. People don't know, Port-au-Prince was the most affected area, was along this area. So people knew about that. So that area this is actually a comparison of OpenStreetmap versus Google MapMaker. And so the areas around this area of interest, people started collaborating and focusing on and mapping intensely and had very, very high quality data. But areas in the outlying areas where there wasn't kind of that incentivization, people weren't going to go and just derive the data, and so the data wasn't quite as good. So it's kind of this very quantitative measurement of where people are focusing and how they're working and how better communication collaboration could help maybe distribute that kind of workload. So in terms of people also engaging with the data and what they want to do with it is not, there were people that were doing great about mapping, but people need to take that data and go off and do other things with it. They want to either understand where response areas were IDP camps. So the exports were made generally of these things for people to go and download as shape files or CSVs because they need to go and put them into their GPS receivers easily, or need to download them to their spreadsheets to do logistics analysis or start doing search and rescue. So being able to make it very easily accessible to the actual data, because people aren't necessarily going to go and learn the API very easily. They just want to go and pull it into their tool of choice and move along with it. And very similar things happened in Chile immediately afterwards. So these things keep happening again and again, understanding how best in these things, one, how do people engage, but what are they going to really care about, where do they want to work, how are they going to engage with the data and the tools, just so they can go about achieving their mission. So I'm going to specifically talk about a project we're working on to try and really address this issue. So one of the first things we had to kind of tackle in addressing this issue was understand that a lot of these areas, both, it can either be abroad or it can even be in the US in very low bandwidth for people who have internet, but how can people get very local access to this information and data? This is actually, it's called a Gator. It is an inflatable satellite that's sitting on the top of a building in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, called the Taj. And so what's fascinating about the Taj is kind of a tale of where social networking really triumphs, and out of that falls things like open data and collaboration. So it's in Afghanistan, in Jalalabad. It happens to be part of the UN Green Zone. It's one of the few places that can serve alcohol. And they have Wi-Fi connectivity. And what they can start doing now is also people start hanging out there, and different contractors and organizations, NGOs, local workers, people can hang out there and buy beer or buy juice and start socializing. What happened is they also had people starting to sitting there for days at a time working, and these are people that otherwise weren't necessarily talking to one another, but all of a sudden they were sitting around chatting and sharing stories, and then started sharing data. And someone said, oh, that's right, you're working on that project. You have, can you show me where that new hospital is being built, or where there's new roads being constructed, or recently closed? Start sharing this data around very socially. And what the group there wanted to do is they said, well, heck, people are drinking beer and they have data, so maybe we set up this thing called Beer for Data. So they actually would start exchanging that. If you gave them data, they would buy you a beer, up to 5 per day. So there's this incentivization. You're already hanging out here, so hey, well, I'll buy you a beer and you give me your USB stick. And so far to date, they've gathered, I believe, over a terabyte of data, just all socially, right? These people, this is to be clear in this recent, based on news things, this is data that normally can be shared. This isn't WikiLeaks kind of unclassified data. This is data that can easily be shared. Just here's the location of hospitals and roads. And if anything was kind of fishy, they did hand it over to any military saying, this looks like it came from you, we don't want it because we don't want to get caught in the middle of this kind of conversation as much as possible. But here it started, this kind of freely sharing information. And what people want to do is, besides putting in hard drive, they want a way to manage this. So we deployed Geo Commons and OpenStreetmap, so they could all essentially have the equivalent of a web mapping geospatial application that started on the cloud. This was the kind of conversation we're saying, really love this kind of stuff, really want maps. We don't have great internet connectivity because the Gator comes up and down, it doesn't work all the time. So you need it disconnected and deployed on the ground. So we sent a Mac Mini with Geo Commons and OpenStreetmap installed on it. So also in the bar, they could start making their own maps and analysis and sharing data between one another. And this wasn't just the Wi-Fi in the bar. They also run a MIT Fab Lab there. And so this is actually built out of local parts. It's plywood and chicken wire, and a very inexpensive Wi-Fi transmitter. It's an off-the-shelf $30 unit. Also, they got 5 or 10 kilometer range out of this. And they can start doing VSAT point-to-point, very, very long distance sharing. So all of a sudden, you now served out to the Jalalabad area OpenStreetmap and Geo Commons, so people could all around the area start sharing and collaborating around this data. So, and any data they pushed into the system would be broadly made available. So kind of how that works behind the scenes, sorry. This actually was a napkin map I've shown before that Mikkel Marin drew a couple years ago and actually talked about it at the first State of the Map that was held in the UK, and talked about this kind of vision for all this data kind of flying around, being brought together, being pushed out to the web, being pulled down locally to, to offline paper maps and things like that. But what's happened in the last couple of years is these tools have emerged. They all actually, you can go and grab them right now and do these things. You can grab these different data sets and archive them locally to flat files. You can load them into offline Slippy maps and data stores and GIS analysis engines. You can start pulling in SMS mechanisms and pull down imagery either from your balloon or unclassed satellite imagery or open aerial map when it comes up. Be able to pull that data, pull it all offline, collaborate with it, and then periodically push that data back up as it's being made available. So synchronizing that data too is all kind of possible now. So it's being able to provide these very powerful collaboration open data tools to the edge where they can be really meaningful. And so where this actually going to start having an impact is the Afghanistan Information Management System, for one. So there are local government organizations that want to possibly share out their data. But they have simple caveats, things like, oh sure, we'll share the data with you, you just have to show up at our office in Kabul. So not something that the average person can do, but someone who's locally there can go pick that data up now, upload it, and push it out to the public web. And so they want to start engaging with maps themselves locally to be able to use this data to understand their local issues. So I was just talking to Todd, one of the things they're running into is there's a lot of construction going on. This is a Chinese company-run digger that's doing a lot of kind of building and moving dirt around. And one of the problems they're running into is from all this moving things around is causing inadvertent the banks to start breaking down in certain areas and starting the river to diverge and start flooding farms and villages along the way. So the people locally there, I mean, they're obviously clear it's getting flooded, but what's causing it? How's it affect? Where should I move my farm to? So what we've been actually developing now with a project with the Transnational Crisis Project and with Todd's group is something called the Digital Gazette. Is a way for people locally in country to be able to, and anywhere, be able to download this and run locally to share data and start collaborating around the data itself. So sure, here are 10,000 different data sets, here's OpenStreetmap, but really what you need is a way to communicate and share what are the issues going around you, embed maps, discuss around these things, see how that evolves over time. And so it's really a great step, to play with OpenStreetmap and Geo Commons for sharing data, and then Crowdgraphs is this social networking tool on top of where people can have groups and discussion lists, but really start focusing, having conversations around geospatial data. And so being able to deploy these things on the ground, so they'll be being deployed for at least 5 cities in Afghanistan, but the same download can go and work in any local town or village to start discussing around these issues and what's locally relevant to everybody there. So, so I kind of went through a lot of these different stories, but I think in the end for all of us to learn is understand that the things we're doing have amazing impact and can really be beneficial, both from just kind of pushing and making data available, but to what on the ground, how will people use this? What farmer in what town, what neighborhood will better understand its own issues and be able to discuss things with its government in a very intelligent way? How will they better be able to plan out their schools and have their children and students better engage and know what's going on around them through these tools, but these tools engaged in meaningful ways that's appropriate for the type of person. So it's finding those incentives and providing them with tools that make the most sense. So I hope that was enlightening to you all. Thank you.
What did you say?
Why didn't you use your own Geo Commons map as your thing?
Well, I'm all about showing off other people's awesome work. And I was making my slides this morning.